Alrighty, we can go ahead and get started. 12 o'clock. Thank you all for being early as well as on time. Round of applause for you guys. My name is Jen. I'm the program director for Graduate Professional Success, and today is a Life Beyond PhD seminar series where we are presenting the end of one journeys for what it looks like before, after your PhD, and where you might go in the future. So we're excited to be able to have our speaker today. In general, speaker will be presenting sort of an overview journey of where he's gone, where he's been, where he's going, and sort of the mixing family. And then we'll open it up for a Q&A. So with that, I am going to go ahead and introduce our speaker. So really today we're really focused on a different path that is not academia. Or sorry, that is in academia, but sort of adjacent to what you know here on the daily basis. Focus on the primarily undergrad institutions where you can continue to still teach and conduct research in an effective manner, while still enjoying primarily the teaching aspect. So, joined faculty at the University of San Diego in 2013. Background leans heavily towards chemistry and molecular biology. That's where he's been teaching and spending a lot of time there. In fact, he wants to go to Florida to teach on that topic. I'm actually going to take a pause there because you're going to take a deep dive into where you've been, what you've accomplished. Hand it off to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So before we get started, let's get a little bit of temperature of the room. First off, how many of you went to a undergraduate focused institution where there really wasn't a graduate student? Certainly not a place like UCI. A bunch of you know that. That's called a PY, or primarily undergraduate institution. They might have a master's program or something. They could have some research programs on campus. But for places like University of San Diego, we don't have graduate students, right? And so what does that look like? And I've actually worked at a couple of different PYs before I came here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. What does it mean and where do you get jobs? Classically, we call, when I was a graduate student and I was a postdoc, I actually made my postdoc advisor really unhappy. He said I was leaving science. I was Howard Hughes Institute at Vanderbilt. I had offers to go to Duke and Wake Forest and NIH, and I ended up going to an undergraduate focused institution. And he was really unhappy. And there's this history of calling it an alternative career. It's a career, right? Because you can't all become an R1 PI. There's just not enough room. And people don't all want that lifestyle. So it's not one and everything else. It's a whole watershed of options, of which a PY is one. And even then, there's a little bunch of diversity of the types of careers you can have as a PY, right? So let's talk a little bit about that. So University of San Diego, well, I moved here 10 years ago from Minnesota, North Dakota, so it took me a while to stop saying University of South Dakota, right? A little bit different, a private school, which is totally not a place that I am used to. It took me a long time to get used to being at a really nice, again, my office is right, let's see, here, and I can see the water and I can see the ocean, and there's a grease spot on the window right by my lab because I keep putting my head on the window and staring outside. It's beautiful, right? Some of my research students, but we're all undergraduate research. I give a research talk a little bit later on today, and everything I've done has been done by undergraduates in our lab. We don't have masters. We don't have, I had a visiting professor for 2 months this semester for the first time in almost 30 years. That was amazing, right? But it was because we were both professors working in the lab with our students. So I got to thank my wife to start with. One of the cool things about being a PY, you get to do a lot of different things. Being in an undergraduate focused institution means you're not just doing research, you're not just doing teaching. You can have all sorts of opportunities. Twice now, I've gotten to teach for a month in either Florence or Rome. And so these pictures aren't just this. This is when I got to take my wife, my daughters, to go to Florence and spend a month while I was teaching the science of food and cooking. And then just last January in Rome, it was for our upper division topics course, the biochemistry and physiology of beer, wine, and alcohol. I know, a tough life, right? But I got to do it. I got paid to do that. So I have to admit, through COVID, it's been a long time. I started as an undergraduate here where I met my wife. We got married in college. I felt I looked more like the Karate Kid And then through COVID and years, it's kind of turned into, well, more Joe exotic. I promised my wife, if she dressed up like Carol, her first name is Carol, that I would shave off the beard. She did this and I had to shave it off right away. But so we've been together, we met in college, we got married in college. And I just always have to thank her to start with, but it has been a long journey. She doesn't normally look like that, not that that's a problem. But she didn't even know who Carol Baskin was, so we don't watch the same stuff on Netflix. So I've been asked to talk a little bit about my journey. So neither of my parents finished high school. My mom left home when she was, I think 15 or almost 16 and had me 4 days after her 17th birthday. Didn't finish high school. And this is my mom's family. This is all my uncles and aunts from my mom's side, Catholic dairy farmers that needed a lot of hands in the field. So these are where's mom? Mom is the second oldest. There's mom right there. I've got 121 first cousins. Yes, we're Catholic. And I'm the fourth. So I have cousins that are younger than my own kids, right? And then there's a picture in there of my dad in the middle, which is funny because the reason he didn't finish high school, because it was either that, go to Army or go to jail when he was a 10th grader. So yeah, that was the only time he looked that honest and beautiful. But we did not come from a family where education was valued or even thought. I remember when I finished high school, my dad said, all right, I'm done. I was the oldest. He says, you're sacrificing. I'm done. If you want to live at home, you got to pay rent. If you want to go to college, you're going to have to figure out how to do it on your own. So 2 days later, I was in the Army because I still wanted to go to college. At the time, I thought I wanted to be a veterinarian, not a veteran. Well, I didn't become a veterinarian, but I became a veteran. So I ended up having to go to the Army to pay for school. And I like the one on the left. I still don't think he looks like Tom Cruise, but you know, I kind of fool my wife some days, right? So the military helped me in a lot of ways because I didn't come from a background which was about education, not at all. It helped give me some discipline and a sense of motivation and a sense of purpose that I sure as heck didn't have before. Most likely, if I looked at a lot of my cousins and friends, out of my 121 cousins, I think there's about 6 of us who went to college, and I'm the only one who went beyond college. And so I do blame or give credit to the military for doing a lot of that. So life is a PY, right? It's really all about the students. Okay, so having a fire out by the ocean with your research group has always been a fact. We finally got to pull that off right in 2019 and then COVID hit, but that was, this is one of my pictures that I just love, right? We had a research meeting out at the beach and we got a spot to have a fire. But it's all about the students, whether it's your teaching, it's mentoring, being around them and having them in your research group, right? I run a large research group. We have 12, 14 students in my group every year. And I've been doing this for almost 30 years. When you first start teaching, you're so nervous. I'll never forget the first day I taught. I was afraid to ask anybody what to do. Nobody told me. There was very little mentoring at the time. I finally got the key to my office and a way to get Xeroxes made from the secretary, but I didn't know what to do. So I went out and bought my own cover back in the day before PowerPoints, or just as PowerPoints were going, you had to make colored overheads. And so I had to make color overheads. And I realized right then and there, I could not afford to do a semester's with the color overheads. So that ended on the first day. I finished within, all those overheads got done probably in 20 minutes of an hour period. And then I was stuck there with nothing else left to teach. That was the worst. But once you get going of it, the hour when you're in the classroom, that's the best. When you're engaging the students, whether you're doing active learning, whether you're doing more traditional lecture, just the give and take and watching the students get it, that's the fastest time of the day. That's when your phone isn't ringing, when you don't have emails, when you don't have appointments, when you don't have administrative stuff. You're in the classroom, you're working with the students, and they thank you when they're done, and they mean it. That's now the best part of the day. And when I go back and I catch my emails, and it's like, oh. All right. But a PY, if you don't like to teach, if you don't want to teach, it ain't for you, because it's still about teaching. All the PYs, and now I've been in a bunch of different leadership positions with Council of Undergraduate Research, ASBMB, Biochemistry Society, American Chemical Society, Project Kaleidoscope. I've had a number of different leadership positions with them, so I've gotten to know a lot of different people. I've been afforded the chance to be an external evaluator for a lot of different universities. All of them, if you aren't good in your craft in the classroom, in the teaching lab, you're not going to get tenure. Now, some of them, like at USD, if you also aren't doing productive work in the research lab, you're not going to get tenure. So you have to have both, which is nice because there's some days where your research sucks. Nothing's working. Your cells are contaminated. I'm going to talk as a biochemist, molecular biologist, right? Your reflux doesn't flux. I don't know. And then there's days when you go in the classroom and you grade and you go, I told them this. I'm trying not to cuss because I think we're on camera. And so both parts of that aspect of your life really help make it an interesting and a balanced kind of lifestyle, but you still have to teach. If you're a great researcher and getting grants and stink in the classroom, you're going to hate your life. But we do research. We do lots of research. Well, lots of research for us. So my first gig, I taught 4 or 5 classes each semester, and they were different preps. It was a state school, very similar to San Marcos, same kind of student makeup and everything else. And that was a choice I made because my wife wanted to go back home. Still expected to do research, but not a lot. If you did something, you got a lot of credit for it, right? Now at USD, but at the time I decided I was going to carve out more research space. I was doing research and getting papers and things like this. And then I ended up deciding I got recruited to go to USD to provide some leadership. And there I teach 2 or 3 courses a semester. And there's a much serious amount of research that's expected. You're expected to publish a couple before you get tenure promotion, not a couple of years to get, continued from one year to the next. 100% your money is covered, right? You don't have to worry about losing a grant and then you don't have enough money to cover mortgage. It's all hard money. And if you get external grants, that money is paying for your summer, so it's extra, right? So I've got a couple of grants right now that are funded by NSF and NIH. And so I'm able to pay myself 10, 12 grand extra in the summer, even though I'm still getting paid. I just take my 9 months and spread it out over 12. So there's different bonuses, right? But we do research, we publish. I've got 4 or 5 papers in the mill, only, just give that person one last experiment and you'll get your name on a paper. Never say yes to that, right? We all know that by now. And like I said, we get to go to do research and do Italy, and the kids are making pasta there. We're learning about beer, wine, and alcohol. And here they're taking pictures of their pictures, and I'm taking, so is this me taking a picture of them? So is that meta something? So, you get to do all these cool things. You get to do a lifestyle that, it's up to you how hard you want to work. And it's all sorts of things. The idea that I would be teaching Italy and Rome, and I think next year in Argentina would be unbelievable in a lot of cases. If I went into industry, that wasn't going to happen, right? So I could just spend a month doing something totally different. Because at my other university, we were running low enrollments in a chemistry department. I created a science, food, and cooking class 25 years ago, and we created a book from it, right? And so now we're working on a second edition of this. This book's being used by about 90 or 100 different schools around the country, which is a really cool aspect of a professional career, right? This is not a cookbook, which my mom still calls it. There's a couple, right? The second edition is going to have more recipes, just so my mom can call it a cookbook. It's how to teach non-majors science by using food. Not here's something about equilibrium, and then at the end, here's a little box about how equilibrium can be used. It's about here's some food and how you explain science. Excited. Oh, textbooks are expensive. I'm going to make big money. Then first time I taught to my students using my book, I went to the bookstore because I wanted a skill, excited to see what it looked like. And that's what I found. Use books, 0 money. You don't make a lot of money as writers on this, but it's still a cool thing to do. Yeah. So when the students said, "Oh, Dr. Provost, I found your book for free." And I went, "Oh man, it took me 4 years to write that damn thing." So what does an award-winning professor look like? Last year, I got the Biochemistry and Molecular Biology ASB&B's Top Educator of the Year award for all universities. It was a hell of an honor. It made me feel really good. It validated all the hard work I've done. So what does one look like? Well, maybe more like that than holding some crystal saying that you really don't. So I've been asked to give you the pathway, the evolution. And if you want some of these slides, because later on there's some more interesting information, you don't need to see me looking like exotic, I know. But I can give you some of those other slides through Joanne, and she can share them if you want. So what is that pathway? What is that evolution? Because I'm still literally in a spot right now where I'm thinking, what do I want to do next? Where do I want my career to go? Who do I want to be? And it doesn't end. Although it's a lot easier when you're financially stable than when you're a graduate student or postdoc and go, shit, I don't know where my money's coming from. I remember those days and it sucks. It just does. You get over it, you get through it, but it stinks. And not to, there's two phrases for all of your careers right now. One's an ancient Hebrew saying, man plans, God laughs. Go ahead and make your plans because it ain't going to work out that way. And listening to the other ancient philosopher, Garth Brooks, thank God for unanswered prayers, because I didn't plan to be here. I had planned to either be in industry or be at a place like UCI at a medical school or something like that. That was my plan. I didn't intend to go into undergraduate education, but it turned out to be the best thing for me. I spent too many years looking behind me going, what if, oh, I should have been, instead of realizing what's in front of me, the options. And so that's a big piece of encouragement I can give you. You're not always going to get to do what you want. You rarely do. Think about 10 years ago where you were. Did you think where you would be now? Probably not. 10 years from now, you're not going to be where you think you should be now. So the more you can embrace this, again, I'm ex-military, embrace the suck, all right? The more you can then find a way to get the opportunities. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's good. It's not rosy. But if you can recognize that, and it took me a while to learn this, then you can build from there, right? Because it's never going to be what you want. And there's going to be a lot of disappointments and struggles on the way, period. Some more for others, and you have to recognize that. But the more you can embrace that, the better off your evolution can be, right? So I have some specific points that I was asked to bring up from Joanne here. So the question, the undergraduate to choosing a doctoral program was really difficult for me. I did a little bit of undergraduate research. There was only 3 or 4 of the students in my class that did at that time. That wasn't a big deal, but it got me a bunch of different invites to graduate schools, big graduate programs, University of Wisconsin, University of Minnesota, stuff like that. I ended up going to University of North Dakota because my wife was also applying for physical therapy, and that's the only school that hadn't told her no when I had to make my decision for grad school. So I said no to all the other schools, and I went to the University of North Dakota. I wasn't from Fargo or Grand Forks. I was from the Twin Cities. That could have been, might as well, east to west coast. But I took that for a family decision, and then promptly they told her no. There was no connection, but it was just bad luck. But again, it was one of those things. If I would have gone to one of the bigger grad programs, because I had to come out of the Army and I struggled a little bit at the beginning, I probably would have chewed up and spit out. And so that was my decision, which turns out to be a theme in the life. Where I wanted to go, where I ended up going, sometimes professionally versus family or personal, are two different things. And the more you can try to find some parts of it that work, the better off you can be. So I went to the undergraduate at Northern School, Northwestern Minnesota School, Bemidji State University. I said I already paid for college, and I stayed in until after the first Gulf War. I was in active duty and in the guards for a bunch of years. You know, the whole start of these conflicts you dream. I want to be all these cool things. And then I had to make a decision, even as an undergraduate. I was a music major at a small scholarship to Berkeley, so small that it was like, here, yeah, you can't come. We'll give you $10. But I was a music major even then in college. So there was a point there where I had to make a choice that I want to stay in the military, solid career, could have been retired by now, be a musician and be poor, but playing amazing songs, I would hope. And then grad school, right? Because I decided after getting the chance to do research, I didn't want to be a veterinarian. I wanted to discover stuff, right? I wanted to be a mechanic in the lab, right? Understand how things are put together and take them apart. So I had a bunch of different choices. Even as a graduate student, I could have gone back into the Army and worked in biomedical research with the Army and skipped the postdoc. I chose to do the postdoc because that was a time where the Army is kind of being underfunded, so I chose the academic, and it was, my wife and I decided we wanted to be more homebodies. And so there's another choice, because when you're in the military, when you're off on tours, you're away from home. And so we wanted to be more of a family, right? And so I said more academic, a lot less travel. I'm not in the Gulf again. I'm not in Europe where she's unaccompanied, or she's in northern Minnesota, I'm in Alabama. So off we went. So then I said, okay, I'm going to go to the postdoc that I want to at this point, which was Vanderbilt. And I know that means, honey, you have to move. We have to go live in Tennessee. She did not like living in Alabama when I was in the Army for a little bit. But we had to do that. And I had to set myself up from when I went from a lower level grad school. I needed to get some pedigree going with the, Howard Hughes and Vanderbilt and all that stuff. And it turned out to be really nice. And a postdoc from him, I'll never forget. He is an Academy of Science member, Howard Hughes. He would be there on a Saturday. He'd show up at about 10 on a Saturday and he'd walk down the hall. We had about 18, 19 postdocs in the lab. He'd make sure you were there. And if you left, once he left about 12 or 1, it was like rats leaving a sinking ship. Boom. They'd be looking out the window, his car's gone, boom, everybody be. It was an older school way of doing it. There was no mentoring, right? He eventually came around. At that point, I had options to go to Duke Medical School, be a professor, Wake Forest, do it NIH. And then I only applied to 2 non-research one or research focused places. And I didn't really want to, but those are both within 2 hours where my wife was born. I made her move to Nashville, where she didn't like. She lived for a little while in Alabama. We were separated different times besides that. So I said, fine, I'll do the Morehead State job. Has anybody heard of Morehead State? Okay. That's because it's a very small school. They hired me as the second person to try to incorporate research into their programs. They had 0 research going on at that time. So that means the stuff that I brought from Vanderbilt when I went around and said, alms for the poor. They gave me an old centrifuge, a set of pipettes and stuff like that. I like tripled the department's research supplies with the U-Haul van that I had to pay out of my own pocket. It was crazy. So off we went. Not what I wanted to do, not what I thought I would do. And I asked constantly, should I stay or go? Sometimes I felt I looked so far behind me, wondering what was wrong or why did I make that choice? I was missing opportunities in front of me. But eventually it turns out I loved it. I had several opportunities because I'll tell you later on, networking and getting out there is super important because suddenly you get to do different projects because you're talking to people and you're getting in front of people and you're saying yes, even though you really don't want to. Sometimes it's not about what it's for you, but it's how you can help the community of faculties, your friends, your peers, not for your benefit or something else. And then suddenly somebody will go, that one time that one person kind of helped us out there, they did a really good job. Let's ask them to do something else. That's how things happen. Suddenly I was getting job offers, but again, family decisions. My oldest was autistic as hell, and we didn't want to move because she was starting to get settled. So eventually when USD called and said, we want you to be chair, I already been chair in Morehead for 7 years. I took my wife, we went up to, it's a free trip to San Diego. She'll never want to go. We got to San Diego in October. It was snowing back home. It was San Diego here. And so we decided to make the change because our oldest was now out of the house, right? So I had a lot of opportunities and those things matched with my priorities. We'll talk about how to pick a career if something, whether it's POI or the careers are for you later on. Along the way, I've had 2 small biotech contract research organizations while being a professor. So while being a professor, we had 8, one had 8 and one had 12 different employees, a couple of part-time, mostly full-time. We were working with QIAGEN, we were working with Promega and a bunch of other folks. We didn't have intellectual property. We were just being their QA, QC and their R&D arm. We were developing DNA vaccines. 22 years ago, we were working on the adenovirus vaccine for a DNA vaccine, which is now basically the Johnson & Johnson. We didn't do anything that made the Johnson & Johnson vaccine what it is, but that's what we were starting on. Working with other. I, for 1 year, gave up tenure to go to a place where I became an administrator across the river. I had a bunch of different opportunities to go to be chair at other universities, but because my middle student who had gotten kicked out, or not kicked out, she did not get kicked out. She would kill me if I said that. She didn't make varsity hockey. But in her senior year, it looked like she would. And if I would have moved in that year, that would have been crushing for her. So I turned down job offers at really nice schools and went across the river and gave up tenure. That kind of fell apart. So my old university said, yeah, we could take you back, please. They gave me a leave of absence. And that's when USD called me up. So there was a lot of times where I didn't make choices for families. And this one I did. But we had waited till the kids were older. So there was a bunch of points in my career where it wasn't maybe optimal. I could have done more, but I slowed down my trajectory for family. And that is Very important. I wish I could say that all my kids love me 100% for it, but it doesn't matter because we did it for them, right? She is now she just put her offer down on her first house. She's a nurse in Colorado. My other one, the autistic daughter, is working in theater, is a theater tech, and she has a house. And my youngest is 22 today, and he's graduating. And for his graduation, I'm giving him new locks to our house, and he's not getting a copy. So went back there, and then I've been chair at USD until this last summer, a total of 14 years. And now I'm literally asking, what do I want to do? Do I want to go be a dean somewhere? I'm getting a lot of offers. Do I want to stay? Where do I want to go? And maybe it was taking a day in Florence when my wife had left early and I was left unattended, walking around drinking a lot of wine, trying to think of where I want to do. And I decided I don't want to leave the lab. I don't want to leave the classroom. I'm just going to stay there where I can own my calendar instead of going be an administrator where you don't own your calendar. You're not in the lab. I felt I had still 2 or 3 research grants in me and several papers. I wanted to bring my students with me. So that was a choice that I literally made, drinking red wine to red wine from one place to another in Florence while my class was out running around being mentored by somebody else. So right now, so how many of you are graduate students? Great. How many of you are postdocs? All right. How many of you know exactly what you're going to do when you know you're going to get there? You're lying if you raise your hand. So thanks for doing that. So you're starting at Great Adventure. I felt like when I was younger, I was starting Great Adventure, and this might date me a lot. Raiders of the Lost Ark. I was Indiana Jones. I was a professor. I was out there, not an archaeologist, but I was doing brave things and really cool things. In reality, I think it felt more like I was Joan of Arc and, screw it, I'm done. You can't fire. Yes, they can. Either way, you're on a path, and it might be dark and scary. It might be clear, but I want to talk to you a little bit about how to know where your path is, or you're going to be asked many times where your path is actually going to be, right? You're going to have to change some of your ideas. So how do you start? Well, some career plans are easy, okay? If you live in Fargo, North Dakota, if you want to go to Bismarck, you take one straight line, you can pretty much sleep the whole way because the road doesn't really move, right? But for other folks, the plans are a lot more complicated with many different options and routes, and sometimes you don't even know where you're going. I have this talk all the time with my undergraduates. What do you want to do? Well, I want to be this major. Stop. I didn't ask you what major you want to be on, what do you want to do? So usually when it's smaller groups, I talk to the students, I have them introduce themselves, and they always, whether it's postdocs or grad students or even faculty, well, I work on the microRNA of this cell, it's doing this and that. Oh, great. Tell me more about yourself. Well, I just learned this new technique. I'm not asking them about their science. I'm asking them about themselves, but you identify as your science, right? Because you live and die by your experiments. People, that ain't the way to be. That's part of your life, but that's not how you should define yourself. You define yourself by where you want to be. So if you don't know where you want to be, except for your science is going to fail you. And sometimes it's going to give you great success, right? Every time you turn in a grant or a paper to be reviewed, you're a winner. Every time I bought a lottery ticket, I'm a winner until I scan it and it says not a winner, damn it, until reviewer 2 tells me I'm definitely not a winner. Anyway, don't define yourself by your science, define yourself by who you are, where you want to be in the world. How many of you have thought about that? How many of you think, good, more of you need to do that first. And your science, not your science. Oh yeah, work-life balance, and I don't know what the hell that really means. That means sometimes it's this way, sometimes it's this way, but hopefully over a longer term, it's somewhere in here. Because there's some days you got to work hard. Some days you got to say, I can't, my kids, my family, myself, like this, right? Just don't tell your PI that you just, I'm running a gel. If you're a molecular biologist, you turn it down to 1 volt, walk away for 2 days. I used to do radioactive phospholipase assays, and you would extract the lipids. Someone would be radioactive, and you put them on a TLC plate, and I do it before the boss got in on Saturday. After a while, I got to be a senior postdoc. I did this on purpose. I put it on there and I go out for an hour or 2 run because it took forever to come back. I could have done other things, but I loved having him catch me when I came back from a run. I go shower right away. Where have you been? I said, there's my TLC plate, boss. You weren't here at 8 in the morning on a Saturday. You don't get to do that. You've been around. Anyway, so who are you? Where are you? Right? You got to make some clear plans. So you got to know where you want to be, and it can't just be your science. Then you can figure where you're going to go and find the right path, because there's a lot of different paths. You can't just go down the path and hoping it gets you there. Well, I mean, you can, but then sometimes you can be more disappointed than you want, right? So what I tell graduate students, postdocs, students, I don't know what I want to do, right? I'm not getting the jobs I wanted. I'm not getting the paper, the grants. I'm not sure what my career is going to be for an undergraduate. So I thought I was going to pre-med, but you know how that goes. So then I tell them to make three different lists and blue sky this, right? Lifestyle, right? Where do you want to live? What part of the country? If you want to live in Fargo, North Dakota, you got to know that because that's going to eventually help you limit up your list. What kind of lifestyle? Do you want a large and in charge lifestyle? Do you want to make a bunch of money? Do you want to be Mother Teresa, right? Do you want a family? Do you not want a family? Do you want 9 to 5? Lifestyle, where you want to live. I like having a little bit of money to do vacations and things like this, right? So that's one of the reasons I didn't pick the Army because you can't do those kind of things, right? Then you got to talk about your passions and research. I know, follow your passions. And I get that, but if my passion was playing hockey, I played 2 hours of hockey last night. Anybody who watched me knows there's no way that's going to be my lifetime. I was a good enough musician to be a professional musician. That passion would not pay for that lifestyle that I wanted. So that sometimes your passions have to become a hobby, right? And so sometimes following a passion that goes with the life you want is more important than just finding a passion. Okay. And interest, and it just write all sorts of crap down. And then occupations or professions or kinds of jobs that you might be looking for. And your lists will be a little bit smaller when I talk to my undergraduates. And then, of course, the old Venn diagram. So some of your passions are not going to be at all related to occupation. I've been doing stained glass for 25 years, and I'm actually pretty good at it. But that's not going to be an occupation I can make a living out of, nor do I want to, right? So it's a passion. Some passions have to be hobbies. Some lifestyles, you know, I would love to live in La Jolla, right? And work 9 to 5. That ain't going to happen, right? So if you can find a career that supports the lifestyle you want, that at least has some of your interests and passions in it, that's the sweet spot. And you can still do that. You may have to, like I thought I was going to be an R1 professor or an industry professor and then eventually retire and then go teach and fish all the time or something. That was a pipe dream that was never, ever going to happen. Nobody hires a senior professor to teach unless it's an adjunct, right? And then it doesn't work that way. So if you can put those things together, but first you got to know where you want to be. And it isn't about science because your science is going to let you down and the science is going to lift you up. But if you don't know where you want to be, that's the thing that will make you happy, right? And sometimes that means, oh, I can't do exactly what I wanted. Maybe I have to go into sales. Maybe I have to do something different, right? You have to figure out what's important to you and prioritize it. And that's a hard set of questions to ask. There's no question about that. This is what I did when I was in Florence. Of course, the wine didn't hurt this. I took notes, and you don't want to see what I wrote at the end. It was mostly cussing. Again, I was in the military and I worked in a factory, So you want to be here. You want to be in that sweet spot where you like to go to work because you're doing something that you love. That doesn't just happen, right? And maybe I would have been a better musician than I would have been a scientist. And I would have definitely, again, reviewer 2 tells me that all the freaking time, I would have been a better musician than a scientist, all right? But I'm happy most of the days I go to work. Not all the days. I don't know. I just graded my last test. When I was going to ask them, they didn't do it, right? I've got a paper I've got to try to write. I don't have time to write it, but I'm happy overall. And I go home and I want to work. I don't have to work, right? Makes a huge difference, huge difference. So picking the right career, you want to have some independence. If you're going to be a PY, it's nice because you can be curious. You can do fishing expedition science because it depends on the kind of school you're at, but even at USD where you have to be productive in our level, I could say, I'm going to do this kind of side research project over here that probably won't get funded, but I can maybe get paper, maybe not. But I'll find some cool stuff. You can do more fishing. It doesn't have to be, here's my hypothesis, here's aim 1, here's aim 2, they're not derivative of each other, blah, 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 right? Got to know if you want to be teaching, how much and what group. Being a PY, you're mostly your own boss. Yes, you have a chair, and especially if it's a chair like me, you will hear from me all the time. And then there's a dean, but most of the time, you're pretty independent. And it's not just independent because you're doing your research, put you in your classroom, but you get to decide how you do some of that. You get to work with your chair on the classes you teach and when you teach them and stuff like that. You can impart your personal values in your lab, in your lifestyle, and even in the classroom. It's important you get family support. It's really hard if your partner doesn't like where you're living or support that kind of lifestyle. Then again, you find conflict and there's no harmony there at all. Or we've had to move now. The hardest part is Easter for us. We're out here in San Diego, everybody's in Minnesota, and one daughter's in Colorado. Easter was just when I made way too much food and then we had a food coma, right? It wasn't the family event it used to be. Know your strengths and weaknesses when it comes to your personality and your profession, right? We have those high pipe dreams and I'm never going to fit in those pants again. All right. So talk to others in the field and get experience. I gave out cards, as many as I could, to most people here. My email's on the back. Feel free, if this is something you're interested, to sit down and we can talk. You can drive down, we can do a Zoom or whatever, just a, what do they call it? Oh yeah, phone call. So what are PUIs like? Do I still have time?
I'll give you 5 minutes for an open Q&A.
All right. So what are POIs like? Well, undergraduate focus, they can be small, they can be large. As I said, you could have like USD and Harvey Mudd and some others where you have to get some grants, you have to write some papers, but the average is about one paper, maybe 1.5 every year or two, right? Everybody in my department has had a grant, or I say out of the 14 faculty we have in chemistry and biochemistry, 10 of us have some sort of a grant now, some smaller, 10,000, 20,000, some I've got a NSF $600,000 grant, blah, blah, blah. Everybody's got different levels of grants. At my other university or at San Marcos, which is very much like my other university, it's just about teaching and maybe getting to do some stuff, right? Startup packages are going to be very different. Don't go in with an R1 mentality into a startup package. My first startup package was not unusual for a school where research wasn't expected. I think I got $2,000. The hell, thank God for the crap I brought down from Vanderbilt. Otherwise, I wouldn't even get started. Find out what your teaching assignments are. What the infrastructure is like, the labs, the support staff. Are there support staff? Some don't have a support staff. So if you're doing a biochem lab, or if you're doing a molecular biology, or if you're doing some other experiential lab, you may be doing all that prep work too. Be aware of that. Public versus private, massively different. You have donuts with the deans, we have drinks with our dean because it's a private school, or maybe it's communion wine, I don't know. But it's very different expectations and very different support system between public and private, not one better than the other. I miss my public school students because it was a very different bunch of first generation students coming in. We had a lot of Native American students coming in from where we were in that part of North Dakota. We don't have that so much at USD because it's freaking expensive, right? So non-teaching POI roles, there's a lot of them. There's non-tenure track positions that are R1 positions if you want to teach. And if you think you're going to get experience by going and being an adjunct for a couple of years and then trying to get a POI, don't do it. Because once you get stuck in that POI track, it's harder and harder to get out. So if you get stuck on that adjunct track, it becomes a sinkhole. I'm sorry for getting tenure track. Not always, but for many. Okay. Coming from a person who's been on the chair 14 years, done searches, looking at all the folks that are applying, you're looking who's going to be those who are going to contribute. It's harder to do that when you've been an adjunct. All right. So what are the advantages of it? Well, teaching and mentoring students in the lab and the classroom. I love that to death. 9-month schedule. This summer, I'm slowing it down. I'm giving a couple of workshops out in Boston. I'm going back to Minnesota and the 4th of July. I've only got a couple of summer research students, and it's going to be a slow summer. I'm going to write a couple of papers and work on the 2nd edition. Usually I have 10, 12 students in the lab, and it's crazy. It's crazy fun, but I get nothing done. I go home and I go, oh my God, what the hell did I do? So sometimes you can take your whole summer off, and some folks do. And some schools, you hermetically seal your office in your lab, you go home, nobody comes back till school year starts. It depends on the kind of POI. And that can be really attractive, right? Go home, recharge, be with your family, play guitar, or whatever the heck you do. It can be really agile. Undergraduates work with you for 3 years, so you've got to be flexible on how you think of your research. Okay. And you got to be able to change how to pick a research project is a whole thing. There's some high risk projects that you can take because if they don't work out, it doesn't matter. You're not going to die if that project doesn't work because you didn't get it funded. Right? Stupid NIH. Sorry, I've been funded by NIH a few times the last couple of times. They hate me. There's a huge return on your investment in that students. I've had 184 students in my research lab. I talk to them all the time. And even students that worked in my research lab, getting them to places they didn't think they could get is incredibly rewarding. Your research, you can collaborate with major universities around, and that's a big plus. It's not a minus. You don't have to be first author on anything or everything. You don't have to have an impact statement. I mean, you know, if you publish in Reader's Digest, that's probably wrong. If you publish in US News Today, that doesn't quite count, but you don't have to have Nature Cell Science or something like that to survive. So a day in the life. 50 hours a week is a slow week, I'm not gonna lie. But it's different. You're grading, you're on email, you're coordinating projects, you're working with students. Teach 1-2 classes a day, depending on, you might have 1 or 2 days of the week where you don't have class. Then you're probably spending your time in your lab and doing other stuff. I'm on the bench working on papers. It's kind of chaotic all the time. I still get to do experiments. I got to whip around a pipette still. You don't get to do that as a PI at an R1 institution, right? You sit in the office in college of postdocs, technician, and grad students. Where's my data? I get to do some of the data. I have to. Lots of management, but I still find some time for all sorts of fun. For me, it isn't work, it's passion. That's because I found that sweet spot. I wanted to talk a little bit about a scholarly approach to teaching, which is something you might not have heard of, but it's there. So if you're thinking about being a PY, teaching isn't what you learned when you were an undergrad, right? There's a whole scholarly thought to teaching. And there's some journals here that talk about the scholarship of teaching and learning. And there's not new, but it's not very old, is DBER, discipline-based education research. These are people who get research, PhDs, and they get a PhD in education. So they're actually doing the science and learning how people learn, and then applying that. The card I gave you on the front talks about what we call a CURE, course undergraduate research experience, how we get research experience to all the students. There's lots of experience and lots of evidence that show that when students get a chance, undergrads, even at risk or marginalized students, get a chance to do research, they retain, they have better grip, they identify as scientists, and they succeed at a much higher rate. Well, how to do that for all your students is to do not a research project, but meaningful research within a classroom. That's called a CURE. I see my colleague standing up. So there are good reasons for doing a CURE. On the back of that card talks about a website that we're changing up a little bit, but talks about the CUREs. If that's something you're interested, along with scholarly teaching, if you're thinking about postdoc, you got to learn about this. Even if you don't get to do it, when you do your application, if you can talk about these things, you're going to be steps ahead. Somebody who said, well, I was a TA. Okay, everybody was a TA. Not being a TA doesn't really help you either, right? Because all right, so take a look at that. We also have workshops, virtual and in-person workshops for how to incorporate research into teaching. But I'm not doing that stuff now. But if you come to some of these, then you can learn the jargon, you can say that, you can put that on your application for a PY. That goes a long ways because it shows you are not just learning your science, but you're learning your other craft, right? We have fellows programs, we have cohorts where we accept postdocs in. We allow folks, this next one's in Boston at the end of July. So really, we're talking about figuring out the equilibrium between teaching and research, right? It's all about touching young people's lives in so many ways, watching the light bulbs go off. I can't tell you the number of times I've had students crying in my office because their parents wanted to be a dentist or a doctor, but they want to do something different, or I don't know what I'm going to do. But being able to help the students by making those connections is incredibly powerful, right? But the thing here is on the bottom, if you go to a school and your priorities don't match the priorities of your department or university, you're going to be miserable. And I'll sniff out somebody who's only taking a class or a job application because they want to stay in San Diego, but they really don't want to teach. They really want to just do research. They can smell that, and I don't want them because they're not going to be happy. And they're not going to participate. They're not going to be collaborative partners in the department. So if your needs and dreams don't match that of your departments, get the hell out. Don't even apply. And I'm not talking about this from a chair. I'm talking about from your own seats. You will be miserable. How to prepare. The first thing I can tell you, if you're a grad student, you got some time, go let the PI know. Well, if you can, go to seminars on education, so you can put that in your quiver, so you have some ammo, right? If your PI is in the room, let them, right? They'll still go at the bench for you, right? Look at PUIs, look at the departments. You come in and you say, I want to teach about microRNA. I don't do any microRNAs, right? In this cell line for left-handed underwater living people. They're gonna say, well, that's great, a topic. You can teach that once every 10 years. What are you gonna do for me as department chair? If you can't teach these kind of classes, I can't hire you. But you got to look at these departments that you might be looking at, say, oh, they teach. If it's a biology, if it's a chemistry, biochemistry department, what undergrad level jobs can you teach? The more you teach, the more utility infill, where you can do a whole bunch of things, the more attractive you're going to be, because I can fill your dance card. I have to employ you in all of these classes. And now and then you get to do those really cool high-end stuff, like the biochemistry of beer, wine, and alcohol in Florence. That once in Florence or in Rome in 30 years, right? There's a book called, it's a little old, but it's still really good, How to Get a Job at a PUI by Malcolm Campbell. Share this with folks. Your cover letter is critical. It's okay to repeat some of the stuff you said. Tell us why you want us, why you want to be part of us as a department. We're not just hiring a graduate student, we're a postdoc. We're not hiring a science project. We're hiring a person that we have to live with for a long time. We want to know that you want to be there and who you are, right? That cover letter is way more important. Now, dear hiring person, I am so excited by your position. I have long since wanted to do. Tell me that you want to be there. Get me excited. So when I look at the rest of it, I'm there, right? Not that you're going to go out and get 3 R1s right away. That's not what we're about. We want to know that you want to be there, that match the mission of the university. That cover letter is important. The teaching philosophy is much harder than you think, but by learning about these scholarly teaching things, some of those references I talked about, use that literature. Even if you haven't taught it, it's okay, because you can say, I've been learning about engaged pedagogy, right? Cures, flipped classrooms. If you say clickers, I'm going to die. Clickers are old and passe, right? That's not where we're at. But by knowing what's happening and knowing the influence that these different engagement philosophies can have, you're showing me that you're already paying attention. You're serious about the half or more of your job, right? But if you say, oh, I'm going to give up and give a lecture, I'm going to give my handouts to everybody, I'm going to record it. Yeah, so does everybody else. Moving on. The DEI statement is important, of course. It's not just about who you are or your experiences, that is important, but how you're going to work with students with different needs, with the things they come to the classes with, to recognize that you want to learn that. You don't have to be an expert at it, to recognize that. And then some of the ways you engage students actually support students of need, of marginalized, right? And so saying, I recognize it, and these are different methods that I want to use and I want to learn to effectively engage these students, all students, is an important way to treat that, right? You don't have to come from, 2 parents that never finished high school to be considered, right? Your research statement can't be an R1. If you're a biochemist, you're writing it for the organic chemist who has no clue and doesn't care. You got to show them, 1, that you can do it. 2, sounds kind of cool. Can you do it with undergrads? And are you going to need like an X-ray crystallography, which we don't have? Because you're in Bismarck, North Dakota, and there is an X-ray machine over at the vet, right? But you want to engage not me as the other biochemist, but you want to engage everybody and show that you can do it with students, right? And even if you have like a really complicated kind of experiment, say, we could do this I could imagine doing this with teams of students, and I would want to apply for this kind of award, even though this is a 6-day experiment, or I could break it down into this, that means you can't do maybe all the mouse work you've ever wanted to do or something, right? All right, we can talk other times if you want to answer some questions. So I'll give these on interview tips and stuff like this. But the last thing I want to say is a lot of PYs, when you come to interview, you of course do all the interviews with the individuals. Oftentimes they'll ask you to teach a class. Holy shit. Then you need to find out the class, get the syllabus, get their notes, see if you can see their notes, right? And then say, well, what are the topics you want to do? And then talk to other people, right? That teach, reach out to me. How do I do that? And the last thing I want to say, anybody have any questions? No, you say, all right, what I just said was this about microRNA. Stuck on microRNA. All right, so I said this. Could it be this or this? Everybody choose A, okay, or B. Why do you think B? Notice I didn't wait for them who don't know me, and God knows there are other faculty in the background. Students don't want to be typing up in the middle of that. You didn't let them just volunteer, you made them vote. And then you say, okay, well, you thought A, why A, right? Oh, that's not a bad idea, but what about this? So you're engaging the class without, that's the worst thing. You're a brand new person, you're scared to death. You go, so what is, does anybody know any questions? Shit. Okay, right? So how you engage the students in the classroom, your research talk, it's not just about the science of it, which people forget sometimes. It's about, can you communicate your science to a broad audience at the undergraduate level, not the R1 faculty, right? All right. If you get that job, we can talk later about that. I'll share this. So I know I went long. So come visit me, call me, Zoom me, except for when I'm playing hockey with my 50 older plus team or my military team. Because I've skipped my kids' parties for that stuff. So one concert, right? How many violins in middle school can you hear? So I went to play hockey instead. All right, thank you very much. So if you have questions or want to chat, use my email on the back.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, there's so many nuggets of decision-making in your career journey that's serendipitous, but also a lot of the external factors to your life, family, if that's important to you, family pressure, if that's important to you. I do want to know, in terms of UCI, we do have the Division of Teaching Excellence and Innovation, if that's a facility and department you want to engage with, if this is something that is interesting to you. I'm going to open up the floor for the last 10 minutes for Q&A. And then also at 2 p.m. we'll be right outside. Dr. Provost has an hour free and he can address any of your specific questions, or you can ask anything else that you would like to. So I'll open up the floor for Q&A and then we'll wrap up.
Or we'll talk about microRNAs, which again, I don't know.
Great talk. Thank you so much. What advice would you give for somebody who is older in life and is still finishing PhD, like 40 plus,
yeah,
and wants to go into teaching at a PUI?
There's nothing, if you can show that, like any other student, in fact, to be honest with you, you're going to have a period in life where you were doing something else. You're still going to want to address that, right?
Yeah.
And you don't have to defend it. You just say, hey, this is what I was doing, but here I am now, right? And if I could hire somebody that was a little more mature and had a good idea and fit for our department, right? They could fit those classes. They would have a research project that would potentially be fundable. Only a handful of schools have to be funded to get hired. But show me all those things I talked about, make it clear. I mean, there's lots of reasons that people come to things later in life, as long as you just do a good job, not defend, you don't get defensive. You just say, hey, here I am, and now this is why I'm here moving forward, right? That's perfectly fine. The difficult part for anybody that changes careers mid-term is, can you get to retirement? Right. But that's a separate issue, isn't it?
Unless you want to teach forever.
Well, that's the nice thing. We don't make a lot of money to start with, but we do fairly well towards the end. And unlike people working construction and other things like that, you can be a professor, especially at a PUI, for a lot longer, right? Because you don't worry about getting grants, right? I'm going to try to write a couple more grants. I've got one that's got the NSF grant's got 3 or 4 more years on it. I got a couple of NIHs I want to put in, but if I don't, I'm still making the same amount of money. And you can go longer, right? And then you can make more time, and maybe eventually they'll say no more summers for students, just me. So that's how I would go with it. If you want to talk later on, I think you got my card, right?
I did not, but I.
Yeah, look up Joseph Provost, Google that, and I'm the one who comes up a ton, a lot. Yeah.
Talk. I noticed that you have a lot of different backgrounds of universities or schools that you went to. What would you say are some of the defining differences between a public versus a private versus a community college environment?
Most of the public PUIs, research is a small part. You might be doing 10-20% of your overall professional career doing research, and the rest of it's teaching and administrative stuff, even if you're not an administrator, right? At a private school, that could still be the case, but usually it shifts more to 40% research, 60% teaching and administrative. On some days, it's 60% research, right? And then some schools like ours expect you're going to be there in the summer, right? Because of that high level of research expectation. But we're not talking about showing up at 7 in the morning, going home at 8 at night. We're talking about rolling in at 9, leaving at 3. Okay. And then Fridays in the summer, part of our department, when I look at a department, when I do external reviews, when I look at departments I would want to work with, I ask, what does it look like in the summer? If it's dead and that's where I want to be, then that's great. But if there's a lot of people and there's students and faculty, not full time. So there's a big difference there. And in public schools, you can't drink on campus, and in private schools, turns out, yeah, you can. But we have drinks with the deans. I had mentioned that earlier. So the dean has a fully stocked bar, but not at a public school. And not to be, but it really comes down to teaching load and research expectations. But some private schools are not financially well off. So they're not going to have the same research expectations as Grinnell, Harvey Mudd, USD, things like that, right? Go ahead, then you.
Great. I had a question about decision making. So
Sorry.
when you were looking at the different places that you're applying to, would you advise that you focus on a PUI or kind of cast your net and say, maybe I'm interested in R1, PUIs, et cetera, et cetera?
Know what kind of life you want. And if either one would work, then apply to both. Right? I applied to only our PUIs because that's where jobs showed up. My wife found them and they were very close to my wife's home in northern Minnesota, right? I was only looking at R1s. So I didn't make that choice then, right? I did it. And then when we did all these interviews, that's where it was. Okay. Not because where I wanted to be professionally. But so what I didn't do is what I now learned, right? I fell into that sweet spot. In fact, there was one point where I was going to leave it all together, teaching all together, and I realized I never wanted it. Right. So it came onto me. But if I could have planned it better, that would have been nice.
Excuse me, piggybacking off of that question. Let's say you get into R01, PUI, community college, whatever, and you decide, I want to go from PUI to R01. I want to go from industry to R01. You kind of talked about it briefly with the adjunct trying to transition. Is it a similar difficulty?
It's going to be almost impossible to go to a PUI to an R1 because R1 is going to make sure, let's say the Duke job, I had to have 2 active R1 grants. Well, if you're not research productive at that level for a couple of years when you're at a PUI, you're not going to be successful. They're not going to hire you. Now they might hire you at Duke or Wake Forest or something like that as an instructor. They have not adjuncts, but they have instructor class, and some of them are tenure track, right? There you're doing more of the teaching, so that those other scientists don't have to teach because that would be a horrible thing. But going from a PUI to now you can go PUI into industry, right? And you can go from industry into PUI. That takes a little bit more, right? Usually because there's a pay cut. We tried to hire people from industry and they wanted to make their industry level pay, and it was just never going to happen, right? I hope that helps.
I think, yeah, you're saying just like, if you're like, to put it bluntly, if you're outperforming your fellow cohort of researchers at a PUI, you might have potential for an R01. If I'm putting, is that
maybe it would be really hard. It depends how long you're there, right? At Moorhead, I way outperformed. There was one other person that we got a bunch of grants. We always had papers. We always had a lot of students, but I was not at the point where I could have jumped up to a major R01. Maybe University of Oklahoma or something like that, right? But maybe not. Would they hire me because I don't have that history? So what I did is I found either I had to decide, do I want to stay here, keep doing this? Do I want to pare down and just do what I need to? Or do I want to go, they called me, right? Do I start looking for jobs where it's higher level research at a PUI, right? It's very hard to go PUI to R1, I'm not going to lie.
Do you think there are any additional difficulties for international applicants, and would you have any advice in this regard?
Overall, no, it's not. We've hired several international folks, right? You just have to be aware. The difficult part is it depends where you did your undergrad. European, Asia, different parts of the world have very different undergraduate experiences. Can you relate and understand what your students you're about to teach are, right? Somebody from the UK undergraduate system is very different than the US undergraduate system, the experience and the expectations. If you can't relate to that, it's going to stick out, right? If you learned it, but didn't go to the US as an undergrad, then that works, right? But we have to make sure that you know what you're getting into, right? Does it make sense? So yes, but there's that important caveat. Do they know what the hell they're getting into, right? Are they gonna be happy here? Once we hire you, if you're unhappy, it's hard to get rid of you, even with before tenure. It's hard to get rid of people without even before tenure. So that's what we're looking for. Will they be happy? Will they be a good mix? Will they be a collegial part of the department? Out of time, all right,
Out of time, but thank you so much.
thank you.